Hi there. Today we're going over the Aviation 430, the multi-engine theory ground. And it's the scenario where you are in your airplane from your boss's company, and he's letting you take it to go drop off a business proposal to a local office, or rather a satellite office. And while you're there, you intend on seeing a baseball game. Things to consider are, can you make the trip? Are there any other special considerations in the trip? TFRs, airspace planning, and things like altitude selection, high terrain between you and your destination. Are you current? Are you familiar with either the departure or arrival airports? How's the weather looking? Is there anything that might throw a wrench into your plans? Can you get from point A to point B safely and then back home? Alright, so you're going to fly 200 nautical miles and you're dropping off a business proposal at a local branch office. While you're in town, you want to see a baseball game. How do you plan a VFR trip like this in a multi-engine aircraft that is conducive to safety as well as not too complicated? Well, it starts with always on the ground. Planning. This is your chance to plan for your outcomes. So sit down and just brainstorm. Think of it. Everything you can think of. Where am I going to encounter turbulence, if any? If I'm flying over a mountain, how high above it do I want to go? Can I go above it? Those kinds of considerations. Do I need to go around it? What if the weather goes bad? Do you have an alternate plan? Does it matter if you leave the company's multi-engine aircraft at another airport while you travel about via commercial airliners to accomplish your goal? Or are you going to stay with the aircraft and your boss is understanding enough that you can just have a couple of days while you wait the weather out? All right, what about if you have an emergency? That brainstorming, that plan, if you are going to fly anywhere, you need to always have that mindset. Where am I going to land this if X, Y, or Z happens? What if I lose an engine? Multi-engine aircraft, that's great. I can keep flying. Not always. But if you're at 15,000 feet and you still have a single engine service ceiling of 5,500 up to maybe 7,000, depending on if you're turbocharged or not. The aircraft that I fly is not, and the single engine service ceiling is 5,500. If I was flying at 15,000 feet, I'd have my oxygen, which is a requirement, which is also part of the plan. Do you have a current inspection on that system? Is it still safe to use? Is it clean? When was the last time that system was filled? Are you going to have services en route that you need to stop and fill up at? Are they going to have that service at your destination? All these types of planning things. But I'm chugging along and I have oxygen, and I want to think that I'm safe because I have oxygen. I'm safe. I'm in a multi-engine aircraft. I'm safe. I'm going over the top of a mountain. But if I lose an engine and the peaks are in the neighborhood of 8,000 feet, 9,000 feet, I'm going to descend into terrain. Now, there are considerations, pitch for VYSC, and that's your best rate of climb, single engine, or your best rate of not descending as fast, single engine. And that's exactly what would happen in a multi-engine aircraft. So if that's the case, it's better to stay at blue line and follow that control down, but that gives you time and space to think, but it's not unlimited. You're not going to stay up there forever, so you need to always have that plan. You're always thinking, and that allows you to have the most amount of time. Maintain blue line, 5 degrees bank into the good engine, gear up, flaps up, everything forward, props, mixtures, and power, all forward, and then pick your landing site. It may not be ideal, but picking something that will be more beneficial than slamming into the side of the mountain, or worse, spinning into the side of a mountain. All right, we talked about oxygen requirements. Now, airspace planning, if you're not familiar with, say, Class Bravo airspaces, not that it can't be done, but can you go around it and avoid that workload? Is it practical? Is it feasible? All these things are considerations. Should I go around? Should I go through? Should I go over? Which leads you into a little bit of ADS-B. Are you legally allowed to do those things, such as go into or above Charlies and Bravos? And you know, that's one of those things that in that planning process, if you have ADS-B and you don't mind a little extra workload as far as radio communications, why not fly through a Bravo airspace if it gets you from point A to point B faster, which helps you conserve fuel, which helps you conserve time, because in the end, you want to have enough time to go see this baseball game. You want to get there before the local branch office closes, you know, business first, and hand them that business proposal. And then if you have extra time, go see this baseball game. Weather, is the weather planned to go south? Is it going to be borderline and you're just hoping for the best? Is it going to be VFR, clear as blue, and you can see forever? And that's one of those you need to be aware of weather factors. If you see a low with a cold front in front of it, brewing off to the northwest, and you're going to be crossing the Rockies, and you think, well, on the first day I'll be fine, I'll stay there for a day, and on the third day I'm coming back, you may or may not encounter a cold front with a low pressure, and there's a high potential for a storm. Are you going to be able to leave before it gets there? Are you going to wait it out and fly on the backside of it? Are you going to experience it at all? You know, like what if you left on the second day instead of the third day to mitigate that altogether? Versus, you know, you have this, oh, yep, weatherman says it's going to be beautiful for the next 7 days and there's no possibility whatsoever. And, you know, then that kind of becomes a reduced risk, but remember, it doesn't go away. There's always something. All right, are you current in the plane? Are you carrying passengers? If you've flown a multi-engine aircraft recently, but it was a different one, or you've flown that multi-engine aircraft, but you didn't get 3 landings and takeoffs to a full, you know, 3 takeoffs and 3 landings to a full stop at night, or takeoffs and landings to carry passengers. Whatever the case may be, are you going to plan for that inevitability? Oh, I'm carrying passengers. I should show up X amount of time early so I can go run up and run through some procedures really quick, refamiliarize myself with the airplane, go do those takeoffs and landings. If you're doing it at night, maybe show up the night before and go get current on your night landing so you can carry passengers at night. Things like that. All right? Will you let business or pleasure affect the flight? Now, if you're on that borderline of the weather and it's right near your personal minimum, say it's not anywhere near legal minimums, but it's near your personal minimums, are you going to let those decisions, those 2 push factors, I want to go see this baseball game, I need to get this proposal to this local field office so that I don't disappoint my boss, right? Those kinds of things are considerations. Those are external factors, those pressures to get stuff done, that get their itis. I have to do this. This is my job. Yeah, but more importantly, you know, you have this need to live before your job. And also the pleasure. Man, am I going to have enough time to go see this baseball game? And if you leave early in the morning, sit in a business meeting maybe and present a proposal, or maybe just drop it off, whatever the case may be. Hang out, go see a baseball game. Then you have this deciding factor. Are you staying the night? Are you leaving? If you're leaving immediately, you've been up for a while, is that going to be a factor? Are you going to be fatigued? Have you eaten? If you're going to stay the night at a hotel, you know, that's a factor, but are you going to be rushed and having to make that decision? Are you going to check out early, or are you going to just have somewhere to crash for, you know, 8 hours to get up and go? Or are you going to wait till you're fully rested, get some food? You know, what happens if you don't get that plane back on time? Is the report absolutely critical? Can you get there later than normal? All these things, are you going to let that affect your decision to go, not go, delay? If it's critical to get there, maybe don't hang it on general aviation and go corporate aviation, or go commercial aviation with like a legacy or a regional carrier. All right, in flight, you're flying around. Will you be in controlled airspace? Assuming yes, what kind? Now, assuming yes, because there's only very few instances across the U.S. where you're flying along and you're not going to be in controlled airspace at a cruise altitude. Now, like I said, I know there's Gulf airspace up to 14.5 across certain areas of the United States, but just percentage-wise, you're at a much higher likelihood of being in controlled airspace. And let's hope that you're not scudding along at, 1,200 feet above the ground. But what kind of airspace are you going to be in? I mentioned a little bit earlier about the Class Bravo airspace, but you also have Charlies and Deltas, and you also have TERSAs, Terminal Radar Service Areas. Class Echo, are you going to be on an airway? Are you going to be up in the flight levels in Class Alpha airspace? How does that affect your plan? Now, we wanted to go VFR, like I mentioned earlier, so we're not going into Alpha. You need to be on an IFR flight plan for that. If you're going to be in Class Bravo or above a Class Charlie, what do you need to have? For Bravo, you need to have that clearance. So you need that two-way radio communication, a specific clearance into the Bravo, and you also need to have certain speed requirements, and actually speed maximums, I should say. And you have a VOR if you're going to IFR, but we're not doing that. Oh yes, and your transponder, of course, and your ADS-B. Class Charlie airspace, two-way radio communication, Mode C, ADS-B. And, if you're talking to these people, you don't need a clearance per se. If you tell them that you're inbound or you have their ATIS information, whatever, and they acknowledge your call sign, that's two-way radio communication. You can go into that airspace, unless they explicitly say you are not to enter this airspace. Delta's a little different, but it's two-way radio communication is the primary thing. Now, there are ways around it, and it is preferred to have a transponder, all these things, but there's things that you can go around. But one of the things to consider is, what kind of workload are you going to have with that airspace? Would you want to go around it? Are you going to go through a VFR corridor or through a Class Bravo airspace? Are you going to go over the Bravo? Are you going to go around it, under it? And whatever the case may be, you just need to understand that there's a certain workload around certain airspaces. All right, will you have automation? Do you have an autopilot? I don't have an autopilot of any kind in the aircraft I fly, so that's going to be a factor. At what point am I going to need a break because I'm sitting there looking out the window for traffic? We're visual, so that's fine. I don't mind doing that. I've also still got the airplane to manage, so I'm dividing my time inside and outside enough so that I can see what's going on with the big picture of the environment, the plane, me, ATC, traffic around me, all these things. So I'm sitting here and I'm flying along, and I notice, fuel's good, engines are good. I'm just fatigued. Maybe I just need to land and just, relax for a little bit. And that goes back into the planning thing. Is there a deadline versus do I need to get there? Am I going to allow that to affect my decision? And, that's one of those things that you're considering. But if I need to land because I'm tired, because I don't have automation to help me manage the airplane and lighten my workload, then I need to plan for that. But one of the things that you can do to help plan that is always be ahead of the airplane. All right, do you have food and water? Outside of, survival aspect, what if you land and you need to sit there and wait it out for a little while, or, whatever in that scenario, having food and water will help in that case, but maintaining that sustenance is important. Our brain doesn't work well if you don't feed it. Just like if your car, you don't give it gas, it's not going to work well. It'd be a good front yard ornament. Well, you don't want your brain to be the top of your head ornament, like, Christmas tree star. You want it to work, so we need to feed it. All right? Where will you divert right now? If you had a problem, if you lost your engine, if you look out in your gear mirror and you just see your gear dangling, what are you going to do? Where are you going to right now? Always that thinking process. Scan, 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 where am I landing? Scan, 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 where am I landing? And that might be a little bit exhausting, but it's a vigilance that's required of pilots because we are responsible for the safety of that flight. If I have to decide I'm landing, where am I going to do it? I don't want to wait until I have an emergency to decide, okay, where am I going to land? remember, I said you want to be ahead of that airplane. Being ahead of that airplane includes in the event of an emergency. I've got an engine fire. I've got an electrical failure. I have no radios. Whatever the case may be, where are you going right now? What if you lost this or that engine? My engine, I have critical engine. So if I lost that left engine, it does more than just aerodynamic effects. I've also lost my hydraulic pump. So gear and flaps, I have an emergency standby handle that I have to pump this gear down with by hand. Now, in the worst case scenario, if there's a hole in the hydraulic system or something like that, I can use a nitrogen charge to blow that gear and lock it in place. But let's start with that sequence of processes that build up to that. Do you know where you are? Where is your alternate from that place? So where am I? And that can help with that diversion process. If I'm going to Dallas, or I'm going to Chicago or Denver or whatever, and I know that I'm nowhere close to it, or maybe I am getting close to it, do I need to divert? Am I still going to continue on? Well, do I need to go to this alternate? What if the airspace gets really busy? And that was one of my contingencies. I'll go into the Bravo provided it's not too busy. And it starts to get busy, and then I want to land somewhere else. If I'm going to Dallas, do I put down in Wichita Falls and rent a car and drive for 2 hours? Or, what's the case? Do I get a little closer maybe and try to chance it? Or, what do I do? And that's one of those things. Where's your alternate? What is your alternate? Is it a field? You just planned on landing in a field? Did you plan on going to another airport? Is there a suitable way for you to get to that alternate? And if not, what's the alternate to the alternate? All right, are you keeping up with the weather around you and at your destination? And that's definitely something that we are still responsible for as pilots. We get our weather report, VFR, clear, awesome, let's go. And something happens that the meteorologist on the weather channel didn't forecast, didn't see coming. Whatever the case may be, maybe you didn't see it coming, or the telephone briefer didn't see it coming. Whatever the case is, it wasn't forecast, no one saw it coming, and when you know it, the weather starts to deteriorate. What do? Are you keeping up with it? Can you fly in it? Because if you're not IFR rated or not IFR current, that can be pretty problematic. Let's say you are IFR current, but you're going into airspace you're unfamiliar with. You're not going to be very proficient in those instrument approaches, and then it might be really sloppy, and that could be pretty dangerous. So where's your planning process in all of this with the weather? Are you paying attention ahead of you as well as around you? Are you still hearing appropriate radio traffic? So if you're flying along and you hear traffic, and then the calls become more sporadic, and then all of a sudden you're not hearing anything, why? Why are you not hearing traffic anymore? Did you just, find a dead space in the ATC communications, or did you miss a handoff, or is your radio out? Things like that. So that's part of this problem solving thing. Like, well, I'm noticing that I'm coming up on 2 different airspaces near each other. Maybe they forgot to hand me off, and have I lost my radios? Things like that. Always be on the thought of what if, what's happened, right? When you're landing, are you familiar with the airport? Again, this is, there's a lot of problems that arise from being somewhere that you're not familiar with. You don't know standard protocol. You don't know that when you're in Florida, northbound traffic and southbound traffic essentially have east and west VFR crossing altitude separations. It's a local practice. It's not written down anywhere. It's just local. If you're going north or south, you have the same altitude problems and restrictions that you would going east-west everywhere else in the U.S. Again, that's a local protocol. It's not written down anywhere. You might have a problem with that. It may not make sense to you. Well, I'm going, 010. I'm going mostly east, but you're going north in their eyes, and that might be a different altitude than you would be expecting. It doesn't make sense to you. It's unfamiliar. The airport itself, it can be problematic going into it. It might have an approach that you're not familiar with. It could have a visual approach that's really deceiving. At my airport, one of the runways has trees right up next to the displaced threshold, which On all the other runways is a really good aiming point, but on this runway, you can't see that aiming point, so it's really deceiving to be aiming for the trees so that you can round out right above the numbers and then do the ground effect right there. But that's the local procedure. Anybody who flies there regularly knows that's what you need to do to avoid landing at the opposite end of the 1,000-footers. Now, this is part of unfamiliar airports. Is there a possibility for complex instructions upon landing? Imagine taxiing at Dallas-Fort Worth if you're not used to going to a busy airspace. Are you going to get, cross 16, turn left, Bravo, Charlie, Alpha, cross 17, and all these, and you're trying to write this down, you're at an unfamiliar airport, you're trying to pull up your taxi diagram and look at where that's leading you to, and that can help. So that's one of the aspects of planning ahead, is having all those resources available. But if there's a possibility for it, it would be nice to be able to plan for that possibility. You might ask for progressive taxi, you might ask for the controller to say it again, that you're unfamiliar with the airport, ask them to slow it down. They're really reasonable people. All right? Do you need to close your flight plan? I've gotten that phone call. Hey, are you the pilot of such and such aircraft? Yes, I am. Hi, this is flight service, and we're just checking on you because you didn't close your flight plan. And that's really embarrassing, and it's really great that they call you and make sure that you can close that flight plan, but it's really helpful if you call them first. All right? How will you leave the aircraft? Are you going to leave it at the FBO to put them in, have them put it in a hangar? Are you going to using their tie downs? Is there a tie down fee, landing fee? Again, nothing's worse than landing at an airport and getting ready to go, and they say, hey, by the way, you owe us some money, and you weren't expecting to owe anybody some money. So again, calling ahead, looking at the chart supplement, trying to find out if there's landing fees, FBO fees, call the FBO, do you have fees, will you waive it if I purchase gas, all these things. And that's one of those, just what are you going to do? Are you required to put it in a hangar, insurance requirements or company requirements? All right, is the weather still going to be good for your return trip? Now again, we can plan all we want, but when it comes time, that plan may change. A cold front may pop up out of nowhere, or this high pressure, this stationary front, whatever, pops up. Wasn't planned, but that was 3 days ago, and now we're looking at what's going on now. That's a problem. So is it going to be a problem? And then again, are you able to drop off that business proposal in time? Do I need to shower? I've been sitting in this airplane. It's hot. I'm from Texas. If you're going on a cross-country trip, you might need a shower before you go anything related to business. Will you still have time to go to the game afterwards? I intended on going to the game, and the business proposal just took too long. I wasn't planning on me having to give this presentation. I was just going to go hand it off and change the plans. When I got there, I had to give a presentation also. Now, am I going to go to the game? If I show up, am I going to just get to see the 6th inning on? What's going on with that? Are you going to stay the night? That's that hotel we were talking about. Are you staying at a friend's house? Are you going to have enough rest and sustenance and food and all these things that you've got to keep in mind that we initially thought of and planned for, but are we going to still have that whenever we're executing the plan? All right, so when we're talking about this weather, how are we going to get this weather information? So when we're planning, you might want to look at the Weather Channel and things like that, but when you start getting close to it, get an Outlook briefing. Transitions into a standard briefing or a full briefing, and that's attaching your name and tail number to a specific flight. It's also a good idea if you have this routing, you can actually put it into 1-800-WXBrief.com and get a standard weather briefing and file your flight plan all at once. I promise I'm not a salesman for 1-800-WXBrief, but it is really helpful. And then you can get an abbreviated briefing. So if you've already gotten a standard briefing and you want to check to see, I got that weather briefing 5 hours ago. Remember, we may or may not be on the borderline of this weather. Right before I leave, I want to get an abbreviated briefing. You can call, you can get online, whatever the case is that's most convenient for you. Get an abbreviated briefing. You can't get an abbreviated briefing if you don't have a standard briefing first. There's nothing to abbreviate. You need all the information. All right, some basics. Now there's more fronts possible for this, but here's some really basic ones. We have your cold front. I had a student once tell me that they look like little icicles. I'm from Texas, they look like little party pennants, but I'd love to claim icicles, but I can't, but it is awesome. All right, warm front. That's those little rising suns. It's about to get hot. You have a stationary front. You have these two clashing forces, a cold front and a warm front. And both have enough energy to keep going, but not enough energy to overpower the other one. So it just sits there, it's stationary. Then you have an occluded front. Notice they're both going in the same direction. That's typically in the form of a cold front catching a warm front, but it can happen where a warm front catches a cold front, but it just doesn't happen as often because slow-moving warm fronts have a hard time catching up to fast-moving cold fronts. All right, we might see some symbols like this or like this. This is frontogenesis. This is the creation of a front. Now this is depicting and creating a cold front, but it can happen with warm fronts as well. And we'll notice that the icicles are every single with the space in between, as opposed to frontolysis, which is the dissipation of a front. And you'll notice the spaces, but the symbols are every other. So that's the difference, and that's the symbol that we'd be looking for the generation versus dissipation of a front. And then the four fronts that are primarily around the world, but that we see in the U.S. as well. The one that's not really listed here that really does affect where I live is a dry line, and it's where you get hot, dry air, particularly coming from the deserts of Mexico, and you get warm, moist air from the Gulf, and they're both going north-ish, but they parallel each other, and you've got warm, moist air on one side, and you've got hot, dry air on the other, and it makes this really cool demonstration of clear as day on one side and a cloudy mess on the other, and it's literally just a straight line in between it, and it's really cool to see from above. But that can cause some really nasty storms as well as that dry line starts to shift back and forth. All right, so a weather depiction chart. This is a really good tool, particularly if you're going really cross country, to get an idea of overall weather conditions. Am I going to be in one of these shaded IFR areas? This line that's surrounding it, but it's not shaded, that's MVFR. It's anywhere between 3 to 5 miles visibility or 1 to 3,000 foot ceilings. But it's worth noting that the weather's not way up high. It's kind of down here-ish, but it could still be good, and it might be good for you depending on how far you're going. Are you going from here to here or vice versa? What's going to happen with that? Shows you some fronts and where they're moving. This stationary front over here tells you if it's a weak cold front or a weak stationary front. Here's a trough, which is an area of low pressure, and you just kind of get an idea of what's going on, and sky cover, and it just gets you a really good idea of planning for what's going on around you. All right, we have radar summary charts. This tells you the decibels of reflection of precipitation in the areas depicted. This doesn't mean that the entire U.S. here isn't completely covered by a cloud blanket. What it does tell you is in these little spots, these little areas, predominantly with the green, that's where the precipitation is. And again, it doesn't depict cloud cover, it depicts precipitation. Not all precipitation, but that's just where it's getting a significant return. All right, we have a graphical forecast for aviation. This replaced the area forecast. And I really like this tool because it's graphic. I'm a graphic person. I like to see what they're doing. Nothing was worse than saying, from this town to this town to this town to this town to over here. If you didn't know where you're at, particularly if you're in a different state, you don't know where all these little towns are that they're naming, it's pretty difficult to get a really good picture of what's going on with this. So this graphic is really helpful for people like me that have trouble, abstracting this to this to this to this and putting it into a picture like this. Now, the cool thing about this is you see where you're at. So if you know where you're at, particularly here in the state of Texas, you might see that the sky is clear anywhere above you, but over here in this area, it gives you the clouds. I don't know how well you can see that, but we have overcast at 6,500 feet with the tops at 7,100 feet. You know, and you start getting to here and it has cirrus above. Now that's helpful to know that, you know, the cloud tops won't be a problem, but it's not going to be bright blue sunshiny above me. You might have that real thin, wispy layer above you, but it's not going to be a factor. If you can get to those clouds, it's not a factor anyways. All right, a METAR. This is your local aerodrome report, and it has a format, a sequence of what we're able to look at. It tells you the type of report, the station in which it was taken from. This is an example. It's not mine. I don't live in Austin. And this tells you the 30th day at 1651 Zulu. This was when the report was taken. Then you have your wind. So in this case, 120 at 8 knots. And that's true. Remember, if you read it, it's true. If you hear it, it's magnetic. The only exception to that is pirate, because it's coming from the cockpit, which everything references magnetic. All right, 4 statute miles, visibility. So that's how far you can see into the sky. Light rain and haze. That's the phenomena that's happening. The sky condition. Yeah. All right, and then we have the clouds broken at 1,000, overcast at 2,300. So it's depicting your cloud layers. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's telling you all the clouds or all the cloud layers, but in this particular case, it tells you your ceilings. But if it's a few layer at 700 and overcast at 10,000, you know, there might be some clouds in between. All right, temperature dew point, temperature 21, dew point 17. And then the altimeter setting, that's the pressure inches of mercury that you put into your Colesman window on your altimeter. And then remarks, RAB 25, that lets you know that rain began at 25 minutes past the hour. So in this particular case, 6:25 Zulu, because we're at the 16th hour. And you can run into a scenario if this says right here, say 1651, and it says RAB 56. Well, that lets you know that since it's not 56 yet up here, that it was 56 of the previous hour. So in that case, it would be 1556. And you might also see an RAE, which is rain ended, with a time associated with that. You can also see precipitation discriminators, alpha 01, alpha 02, and so on in the remarks section. You'll also see things like the sea level pressure and the trend, and a more extended temperature dew point indication. All right, so this is the one that you might see if you're taking an exam for the FAA. I took this out of the chart supplement from the FAA for the private pilot and that whole book. And it gives you 5 different examples. It gives you 3 METARs and 2 species. Now, the specie is a type of METAR that they put out that's for very special circumstances. It needs to be put out because it's not every hour on the hour if there's special circumstances going on. They need to get that information out instead of waiting an hour to do it. All right, TAF. Similar to a METAR, except for it's a terminal aerodrome forecast. That's right, it's forecast. All right, you're running into still the same idea of where it's at. This is still when the report was drafted, except for this you have a validity period. In this case, at Memphis, on the 12th day at 1800 is the start until the 13th day at 2400. Now the average TAF is valid for 24 hours, but certain airports, particularly with international traffic, need a 30-hour TAF similar to this, so that those carriers have enough information to plan these flights off of. You know, sometimes it's 24 hours just isn't enough, so they come out with these that are 30 hours. And it can be quite a lot to look at if you're not, you're not familiar with looking at it. The more you practice it, the better you'll become at it. So we have the wind, 200 at 12 knots, 5 statute miles, haze, broken at 3,000 with a probability of 40%. All right, so that's how that would read. And then you come into the different time blocks, going from one to the other, becoming. And that's just how you continue to read those. SIGMET versus AirMet. Now, a SIGMET is an advisory that includes weather phenomena that are potentially hazardous to all aircraft. It's a significant meteorological condition. Versus an AirMet, which is typically only for lighter or general aviation, something that's not going to necessarily pose a problem to all aircraft. If you think about the traffic volume going in and out of airports, do you think an IFR, or rather an IMC, is going to be problematic if there's 900-foot ceilings and 2 miles of visibility? No, those airlines are still going. You may not go in your little 172, 152. You may not. You may, depending on what you're comfortable, capable, and certified to do in your airplane as well. But that's a consideration for you at that point. That's not a consideration for them. They're going. All right, so you have winds and temperatures aloft. This tells you multiple stations at multiple altitudes. And again, this is taken from the testing supplement for the private pilot. And gives you some clear notes about it. The data was based on this date and time. And then it's valid for this period, for use between this period. And then a little note here, temps negative above 24,000. And if you'll notice here at all these altitudes, they have the temperature indication, whether it's positive or negative. But after 24,000, it just goes away. All of these weather reports like this were coded from military, and all of this data was transcribed via Morse code. And so skipping, one character but 6 times can save a lot of, all right. So that's one of the things that for consideration. So another thing that we're looking at is you have 6 digits, and it gives you 3 pieces of information. It tells you the direction of the wind, it tells you the speed of the wind, and it tells you the temperature at that altitude above that station. So in this case, at St. Louis, it's 230 at 39 knots and -4 degrees Celsius at 12,000 feet. We start getting into some special circumstances the higher we go, because we might be encountering a jet stream, right? 730649. Now wait, there's not 73 degrees or 730 degrees in a circle. This is your indication that something is special. So with this code, you would subtract 50. It's an arbitrary number. They chose 50. You just subtract 50. So subtract 50 from 73 gives you 23. That gives you one direction, 230. What that code indicates is that you have a 3-digit wind. Now, they don't report anything other than 100s. If it's greater than 199, they will report it as 199. There's not going to be much difference between 199 and the highest ever recorded. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 212 knots. There's not much difference there. It's still going to be ridiculous. So if I have 7306, so that's 230 on the wind, which indicates 106 knots of velocity, and then -49 Celsius for the temperature. So performance data, once we have all this data, all this weather, we can start to calculate our altitudes. Find that favorable tailwind. If your aircraft can handle getting up to that 46,000 feet and it's got that structural integrity to do it, it'd be really nice to have a 106 knot tailwind. You definitely don't want a 106 knot headwind when you can cruise at maybe 24,000 and have a 40 knot headwind instead. All right. How much time are you going to spend in and out? Well, that depends on if you have a 106 knot tailwind versus a 50 knot headwind, and vice versa, and crosswind. And what kind of airspeeds are we looking at? Are we planning on doing this at as fast as possible, the best forward speed? Or are we going to plan on really got to stretch this fuel burn out because it's going to be tight? So I may burn less fuel, but I may have to calculate that speed difference because of it. All right. Am I going to take a crosswind versus a headwind? What's the difference between a 10 knot crosswind and a 5 knot headwind? Well, if I've got a 10 knot crosswind and I can throw in some of that elevator trim to help me hold into position, or not elevator, but rather rudder, that's going to help me have that best forward speed. Whereas if I have a 5 knot headwind, that it's less wind, but it's opposing me, so I'm having to account for that. All right, so we need to ensure that our diversion airports are capable of accommodating us. If I need to land, I can't come in at a really, really tiny airport, because there's some considerations that I need to consider with the aircraft I fly. All right, so the plane that I fly is a Piper Apache, and it requires 1,200 feet takeoff, 1,000 feet to land on a normal day with regular load. All right, accelerate stop distance is roughly 2,500 feet. So if I'm going into a 3,000 foot runway, I might be cautious. Yeah, only need 1,000 feet to land, but if I'm coming back out, if I want to do that safely, can I accelerate and stop in that distance? Now, this is calculated off of, the whole test pilot with a brand new airplane and all that. My airplane's fairly well maintained, but yeah, it's old. It's 70 years old. So that's one of those things that I've got to consider. I'll be really cautious. I always add 30% to whatever numbers I calculate up whenever I'm getting these numbers. Oh, I've got 1,000 foot takeoff run. Well, I'm going to expect 1,300. I'm still a student in the aircraft. I'm not familiar with it. I don't have much time in it. And it gives me that safety margin. And for the most part, 30% has been a little overcautious. I could probably get away with maybe 15%. But again, I'm creating that safety margin for myself to do that. All right, so with this presentation, these are the references that I used. And this gives just a general overview of the planning process, considering weather, airspace planning, and external factors when we're considering the flight planning process in a multi-engine aircraft. So and it's not necessarily multi-engine, but that's what this presentation has been about. So I thank you for taking the time to listen to my video, and I look forward to doing another one for you guys later.